So, we've been talking about the progressive movement. And one of the things that I told you is that it crossed party lines. So, you had Democrats and Republicans that were part of the progressive movement. And that you saw it on a local level, a state level, and a federal level. And what I mean by that is that you saw reforms on the local level, on the state level, and the federal level. And so today we're going to kind of talk about some reforms on the state and federal level. The state at the state's level, they started to adopt a lot of the reforms that the populist wanted. For example, in 1896, South Carolina started the primary system. In which instead of party leaders picking the candidates, I'm not sure why I wrote that down. It was they would institute a primary system. So basically, the Democrats would run against the Democrats. And in South Carolina, that's pretty much, remember we talked about white primaries? This is when you start seeing that put into effect. But let's put it in today's terms, okay? Because like I said, in South Carolina, there weren't really Republicans that were running, but the Democrats run against the Democrats. For example, when if you had a governor that was running in Louisiana, there's an open primary for the gubernatorial election, so everybody runs against each other. But in many states, you'll have the Democrats who'll run against each other, and then the Republicans will run against each other, and then whoever wins that will run against each other. So whoever wins the Democrats and whoever wins the Republicans. Okay, so the way it used to be is that party leaders would choose their nominee, and they would then run against each other. But what this did was it gave people a greater voice in the political process, which was all part of the populists and what they wanted to do, and which was now part of the progressive movement. All right. Really, within 2 decades, nearly all of the other states followed suit. All right. In 1898, South Dakota instituted a initiative, or started or adopted the initiative and the referendum. And if you recall, an initiative basically means that the people, if the process is different depending on where you go, but people can introduce legislation. A referendum is people can vote on legislation. And then in Oregon, around the same time, a little bit later actually, I'm not sure exactly when, something right around 1910, they adopted the recall. And that means that someone is elected and then they start going foo-foo, kind of going crazy, then the people can vote them out of office and have in different states do it in a different way. In Louisiana, they have what they call a recall election. First, you have to have a certain percentage of petitions signed to have a recall election. I forgot what the percentage is, but it's something that you could easily look that up. And then, if there's enough, if a high enough percentage of registered voters sign the petition to have a recall election, they have an election to whether there is kind of a yes or no, whether they're going to have um, a recall. And if there's a majority that says yes, then they just basically have the election over again. Now, I mean, every state is different. Okay, and so Louisiana is actually kind of complicated or kind of hard to do. I remember when Edwin Edwards was elected for the last time for governor, there was a recall, but they didn't get enough signatures. Edwards is probably more popular now that he's out of jail than he was before, especially then. All right, he's definitely a character. I saw him speak several times, and he was always a great speaker. Anyway, within a decade, nearly 20 states had adopted the initiative and referendum. Nearly a dozen states the recall. Um, not that remember. Just remember it was all really in the early, um, late 1800s, early 1900s that all this was going on. All right. You also saw states that had that started passing workmen's compensation. You had states that started passing laws that had stricter building codes. And factory inspection laws. This came after 146 women, well, I think it was mostly women, were burned to death by a 1911 fire at the Triangle Shirtwaist Company in New York due to adequate exits. You started also seeing what they called the Australian or the secret ballot being passed. And we talked about that and the importance of that. If you're working somewhere and your boss tells you to vote for somebody and you vote for somebody different and you get fired, well, then you would appreciate the secret ballot. Okay, and so that we take that for granted today, but that's very important. Probably one of the most, and you need to know this for your test, probably one of the most important and most famous governors, that way, progressive governors, was Robert La Follette. I don't know why I did that, but anyway, Robert La Follette was the governor of Wisconsin in the early 1900s, 1901 to 1906, I believe it was. And he was, sort of the typical story. He was a guy that was born in a log cabin, but worked himself up. Eventually, got a university education at the University of Wisconsin. He was kind of short, muscular guy, a very intense orator, very great speaker. Kind of like Edwin Edwards, I was telling you earlier. He was a great speaker. I saw him speak one time in Girard Park in Lafayette. And I remember he was saying, "From the hills of North Louisiana, from the streaming bayous of the South, we will lead this nation. Louisiana will lead the nation into the new millennium." And it was just like, oh man, that's awesome. Then later on, you think, okay, Louisiana lead the nation. I don't know. But anyway, he made you like really proud to be from Louisiana, which I am, very much so. Um, Anyway, he established a close relationship with university professors and academics and sought their advice. He formed a legislative reference bureau of scholars to provide the state legislature with research and to help them with legislation. And he passed civil service reform. Basically, what this meant is that if you wanted to work in government, you had to pass a test, and they would try to make it, as objective as possible. And what that would do is that would, get the most qualified people. And then once you were in that, once you had a civil service job, you couldn't be fired, at a whim just because of political reasons. In other words, if you were supported one person or the other. In fact, most civil service workers, you can't be involved in politics. You can go and you can vote, but that's one of the things that you kind of give up. And so that's to keep politics out of government jobs, because what was happening before was that one person would get elected and they would hire these people, and 4 years later they would get unelected. Somebody else would get elected. They'd get rid of these people and then hire these people for 4 more years, and somebody else would get elected and they'd get rid of these people. And they would get these people, and so it was just too much turnaround, and so it was very inefficient, and people wouldn't learn their job. So civil service reform was very important. He implemented conservationist policies, workmen's compensation, state regulation of railroads and banks, um, higher taxes on corporations, or uh, what they would what you call a progressive tax, um, and the state's first income tax. And again, this is a progressive tax. And in other words, if you make, the idea is if you make $500,000, all right, and you pay a higher percentage of someone that makes 30,000. Some people say, well, should have a flat tax. But what people would argue is that, a 30% tax on this guy, all right, is not going to hurt him like a 30% tax on this person. So that's a progressive tax, and there's all kinds of debate on whether that's good or not. On the federal level, one of the most famous progressives, was President Theodore Roosevelt. Now, Roosevelt became president when William McKinley, remember I talked about him? When William McKinley was assassinated 6 months after his reelection. So in 1896, McKinley was elected. Then he was elected again in 1901, inaugurated in 1900, inaugurated in 1901. 6 months after that, he was assassinated. And that made Theodore Roosevelt the youngest president ever. I think he was, I'm not sure, actually. I think he was around 43, maybe 42, actually. That sounds 43, 42 or 43. Now, the youngest elected president was Kennedy, okay, who was 45. So, don't, if you go and you tell your parents or somebody that Roosevelt was the youngest president ever, they may say Kennedy, because that's what most people think, because he was the youngest elected. And so you don't have to be like, well, actually, it was Theodore Roosevelt, blah blah blah. You just kind of chill out on that. All right, but it's good to know. So Roosevelt, as a child, he grew up pretty wealthy in a distinguished New York family. He was, as a child, he built himself up athletically, because he was kind of scrawny and had asthma, but he did a strict routine of exercise. He graduated from Harvard, and he loved the West so much that he bought a ranch in the Dakotas. All right, he was a man of incredible energy. He had helped plot the Spanish-American War in 1898. We're going to talk about that later on. And he led the famous Rough Riders in Cuba against the Spanish. Now, he was often called a trust buster, because he would break up what was known as trust or monopolies. Um, and like I said, under Roosevelt, they passed the Meat Inspection Act of 1906. Also, they passed the Pure Food and Drug Act in 1906, which started the FDA. And a lot of people complain about the FDA sometimes, but obviously it's good to know that you can go get a steak and it's not horse meat. And he did a lot in terms of conserving a lot of our natural resources. So he was a conservationist. All right, so we will end there. There's certainly a lot more about the progressives that we could talk about. Um, and like I said, the progressive movement, pretty much uh, continued until around really when World War One began. So, but we'll end there. I think that's enough for now, and we will. Um, I will give you information. I'll send you an email and maybe even do a little YouTube video about your test. Actually, I could do that. I could do that now. Um, so what I want you to know is that I'm going to give you a multiple choice test, and also I'm going to send you, and you'll see it. I'll send everybody an email, a take-home essay. And so the multiple choice test, when you open it, okay, do not close it. Do not close it. All right, and I will give you um, only 1 hour to complete the test. All right, sometimes don't cheat. Okay, just do your best. All right, don't look at your notes. Don't go back to the lectures and all that kind of stuff. Okay, uh, just do your best because it's not fair. Like sometimes I'll get people, they don't cheat, and they make say 35 out of 50, which is a 70, and then you get somebody that makes a 95, and I can tell, or 100. And I can just tell that this person from reading, like, maybe their essays or whatever, it makes me skeptical. All right, when people, like do so well, it kind of makes you, but they don't do well on other things, kind of makes you wonder. Okay, and so just do your very best. All right, and I think you'll be fine. What you need to do is go through the lectures. All right, and you know how to open everything up because you had the little quiz that I sent. That was more like a practice thing. You'll actually have some questions from that quiz on the test. All right, but this time you're not going to get two chances at it. And like I said, once you start, you're only going to have 1 hour. It's going to be about 50 multiple choice questions. That's plenty of time. Maybe I'll give you hour and 15 minutes. That would be fair. Okay, so that's going to be 75 minutes. So make sure that once you start, okay, that you finish right there. So you need to be sure that you're somewhere that it's quiet, that you're not going to have any problems, and that you can complete it. So I'll probably leave the test open for a few days, probably about 3 days. All right, but once you start, you have to sit there and you have to complete it, and that's it. Okay. And the best way to study for this is to go through your notes, go through the lectures, take notes, study your notes, then go into your textbook and read the material that correlates with the notes. Okay, you don't have to read everything, but go in there and that's going to help you a lot. Okay, all right, and I will send you an email when on giving you more information.